Welcome back. In our last lesson, we started learning about how we can iterate through our arrays in JavaScript. And in this lesson, we're going to go ahead and continue right where we left off. So to get started, if you can go ahead and go into your project folder, let's go ahead and go into 21-array iteration 2 folder, go into the start subfolder and open up main.js. Then in your browser, if you can go ahead and open up the index.html page, you should see array iteration part 2. So the next method we're going to take a look at is reduce write, and it's very similar to reduce, except we process our array in reverse. So we process from right to left. So to see this as an example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy these lines of code here. I'm going to go ahead and place them down here, and then I'm going to go ahead and change our sum variable to be sum2, since we already made a const. Since we declared it as a const up here, we cannot reuse it. And then I'm going to go ahead and change reduce to reduce write. And then just to make it a little bit clearer, I'm just going to do a console log on my array before we start processing any of our elements here. And I'm just going to go ahead and do console log. I'm going to do a string of asterisks. And that way everything just kind of stands out a little bit from our last lesson. So if we go ahead and save and refresh our page, if we go ahead and scroll up a little bit in our console, we should see our asterisks get logged, and then we see our original array here, so 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And so you'll see, similar to reduce, we can pass in an initial value, so we start with 10, since we pass that in here. And then for our first element, we start with 9, and then you see that we start at index 4. So with reduce, we started at the first index, so 0, and we had 1. Now we start with the 9. And then from there, you'll see that we just go through and process each element. And in our current function, we're just doing the previous plus the current value. So the next method we're going to take a look at is the every method. So this method is pretty cool because what it's used for is it's used for checking if all of the values in an array will pass a certain test. And how it works is basically we iterate through our array one element at a time, and then we're checking for some type of criteria, and we return true or false. And if all elements are true, then we're going to go ahead and return true that, hey, all these elements do match this criteria. Otherwise, if one single element does not, then we return false because not every element does. So to see an example, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a new variable. I'm going to do let results equal my array. And then I'm going to go ahead and do every. And then this method is going to take 2 callbacks, so similar to some of our other ones, where first we'll have our callback function that takes the value, the index, and the array as parameters, and then we'll have the scope that we can utilize. So I'm just going to do function, and I'm just going to go ahead and use value. I'm not going to use the other parameters in this case, so I'm going to go ahead and leave them out. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my open and closing curlies. So then inside my callback function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if all of our elements are greater than 7. So I'm going to go ahead and return value is greater than 7. And then I'm going to go ahead and console.log our results. So if I go ahead and save and refresh, you should see false get logged to the console. And that makes sense because our array is 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And since we only have one element that is greater than 7, this should fail because not all the elements pass that test. However, if we go in and change this to a 0, it should now pass because all of our elements pass this criteria. So our next method is called sum, and this method is similar to every in that we're checking all the elements in our array for some type of criteria. However, this method will return true if at least one of the elements passes that condition. So to see an example, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and copy this line of code here without the let. I'm going to go ahead and paste it down here, and I'm going to go ahead and do sum. And then I'm going to go ahead and change my value back to 7, and then we're going to go ahead and console log our result. So if we go ahead and save and refresh our page, you'll see that we logged true. And that's because we have at least one element that passes that criteria, and so we log that value. So one other thing I want to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and add a console log statement. I'm just going to go ahead and console log our value. So then we're going to go ahead and save and refresh, and what we should see is we should see 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and then we return true. Now, the reason I wanted to do this was because this function is really cool, because what it'll do is it will process each element until it finds a value that passes the criteria, and then it will stop processing that array. So as an example, if I go ahead and change this to 1, so we want an element that's greater than 1, you'll see we'll process our array. We have 1, then 3, and then because we finally found a value that's true, we go ahead and exit out of our callback function. So this is important to know, because if you need to do something with your array and do something with every element, sum is not the appropriate method for that. It's also important because we're only going to process what we need to process of that array. And one thing to note, as we saw, if no values ever pass, then it will process all elements until we reach the end.